War Room, Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Yeah, I really welcome our next guest, who's a very special individual, a real warrior, not just for the Trump movement, but for the American people and people throughout the world. We have on the phone Dr. Peter Navarro, the Assistant to the President for Manufacturing. But Dr. Navarro is joining us today to talk about hydroxy.
I got involved in this whole pandemic issue simply because I was the tip of the spear mobilizing our manufacturing capacity through the Defense Production Act in order to make sure we have the swabs for testing, the ventilators for people in the ICU, and medicines like hydroxychloroquine. And through that experience, I was able to distribute at one point tens of millions of doses of hydroxychloroquine into 14 different hot zones at the height of the pandemic: Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans, etc. And to my dismay, we had a series of studies come out which were deeply flawed, that the fake news media then in turn used to create what I call hydroxy hysteria, which is an undue fear of a medicine which has been used for decades. And what I saw at the front lines were two things happen. One is all that medicine that was distributed from FEMA to the people of America, the demand just dried up literally overnight. And at the same time, hospital systems like Detroit began to have a hard time finding patients to conduct the randomized blind clinical studies that we need to ultimately determine without fail the safety and efficacy of the drug. So that's kind of how I got in this. But yesterday should be, I'm not sure it will be, but it should be the biggest turning point for the use of hydroxychloroquine that we've seen since this whole debate began. Let's be honest with each other. The minute that President Donald J. Trump said that hydroxychloroquine had possible safety and efficacy for preventative use as well as for therapeutic use, the mainstream media has just hammered him and the drug relentlessly. And here's the poster child for that. Yesterday, this major study comes out, and there was only one news outlet that covered it. And the New York Times passed, the Washington Post passed, I think the Wall Street Journal passed, and the results are amazing. It's 2,600 observations, shows a 51% reduction in the mortality rate if you use hydroxychloroquine for early treatment. Now, let me talk a little bit about the science of hydroxy and why this study is so path-breaking. The reason why hydroxychloroquine is hypothesized to work is it has two things: a blocking effect and an alkalinity effect to kill the virus. The blocking effect is basically the desugaring of your what they call your ACE2 receptors, which are on the outsides of your cells. And when you desugar them, it makes it harder for that coronavirus to penetrate the cell. And then if the virus penetrates the cell, what hydroxychloroquine also does is increase the pH, mildly acidic to mildly alkaline. That stops or slows down the replication of the virus. So you can see that from a preventative use effect, people who take the stuff for lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, or if you just take it because you don't want to be infected with the China virus, you have this blocking effect help you as well as the alkalinity effect. But here's the key point about the Detroit study. This medicine shows the best promise of working in early treatment, which is the first 7 days of the infection. First 7 days, you start with with a fever. You start with a dry cough. You start with fatigue. But at that point, your lungs are still intact, and the virus hasn't really contaminated the other organs of your body. And if you move past that into the next 7 days, the 8 days to 14 days, what happens is you lose 3 to 5 nodes of your lungs to the disease. Your organs begin to degrade, and at that point, the medicine won't work. So here's the point. The previous studies which have shown that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work or could harm you are basically late treatment studies. There wasn't enough sophistication amongst the scientific community to distinguish between early treatment and late treatment. What the Detroit hospital system did, through the genius of Dr. William O'Neill, who runs that system, is understand that early treatment was critical. So what they did was the nanosecond a patient would come in the emergency room, they would set in motion the process of administering hydroxychloroquine. So over 80% of the patients got hydroxy within the first 24 hours, and over 90% got it by the first 48 hours. And that's
Peter,
the key. Yeah, go ahead.
Peter, just reiterate for the audience, the results of it. The results of it were what? If you got it when you went into this study, what were the percentage of lives that were saved?
You had a 51% reduction in the mortality rate. It went from 26% mortality rate for people with no hydroxy. In other words, 1 out of every 4 died. And then it goes down to 13%. Now, if you just scale that up, Steve, just scale that up. I mean, we're over 120,000 Americans who have died already from the disease. We're heading towards 150,000 in the next month or so. If you administer, what this study says, that if these study results hold, it means that this drug could have saved tens of thousands of lives already, and has the potential to save literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people worldwide if it's used in early treatment, which is to say the minute you get symptoms, you take it. Now, just disclaimer here, talk to your physician, right? Because there are some contraindications for it. But look, lupus patients, rheumatoid arthritis patients, malaria, been used for decades and decades. This study, Steve, also found no adverse effects, okay? 50% reduction in mortality, no adverse effects. New York Times won't even print a story about it. Now, you go look in the archives of the New York Times, right? And you can see them trumpeting all these bad studies, the Lancet study that got discredited, the VA study that was a joke, the Brazil study, which by design was meant to kill people. But a study like this comes out, truly path-breaking, and the Gray Layton, the Washington Post won't even cover the news. I mean, this is these people hate Donald J. Trump more than they love saving lives of American people. It's blood on their hands, to paraphrase one of the text messages I got from a doctor yesterday after he saw the study. Blood on their hands, not just for therapeutic, but also for prophylaxis. And look, this stuff costs $11 for the whole treatment cycle, Steve. $11. You know how much remdesivir is priced at now? They got it over $3,000. And when I was originally looking at this back in February, the price was only $2,000. Plus, you got to use remdesivir in a hospital setting intravenously for like 10 days straight. Hydroxychloroquine, you can take it at home. So there's something going on here, and I want to reemphasize, these people hate Donald J. Trump more than they care about saving lives, and it's blood on the hands of these journalists who have romanticized these bad studies. The bad studies that have gotten out there and been pimped by the likes of the New York Times and the Washington Post have tended to be bulletin board, non-peer-reviewed on boards like Med.RIX. And peer review simply means that a study comes into a journal and it's refereed or reviewed by scientists to judge whether or not it's a well-executed study. And so this study that's just come out from the Detroit hospital system appears in a prestigious journal, the Journal of Infectious Diseases. It was peer-reviewed, and I've looked at carefully, not as a medical doctor, but as a statistician and econometrician, and it's tight. It's good. I mean, it's got high statistical significance. The findings are compelling, and there's interestingly enough, there's a second study that just broke from the Mount Sinai hospital system with more than 6,000 observations in it, and their conclusion is a lower mortality rate with patients on hydroxychloroquine as well. So in the space of 24 hours, you have two of the largest hospital systems coming out with studies that say hydroxychloroquine saves lives. And so what we have now is a situation where there's a phenomenon I call hydroxyhysteria, and it's this unfounded fear of using a medicine that's been safely used for more than 6 decades. It's because this hydroxyhysteria has come about because of the politicization of science, because of people who hate Donald Trump more than they care about science and saving lives. And we've not just seen it in the mainstream media, the newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post that have glorified these bad studies. We've also seen it in the medical community. I mean, the journal, I think the poster child for this is The Lancet. Once one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. It's run by an editor now who literally has written editorials calling for the defeat of Donald Trump in the election. The man was totally embarrassed by the publication of a study which never should have been published, but which had to be retracted. But it did its damage. The mainstream media, again, glorified that study, which said that hydroxy could harm you when the study was just totally fake. So here's where we stand. We've got 2 studies in a 24-hour period that show that hydroxychloroquine can possibly save lives in a significant way at a time when cases are rising, and we've got over 60 million doses of hydroxychloroquine gathering dust in the FEMA Strategic National Stockpile. We've got a media which refuses today to cover what is arguably the best study to date on the benefits of hydroxychloroquine, and people are dying. So there is blood on the hands of every journalist who refuses to cover this story and get this message out. And I'm glad that War Room Pandemic, which is always ahead of the curve, skating to where the puck's going to be, is right on this story today. I don't know, Steve, and if we're not, and if we don't get past it, if we can't punch through, people are going to die because of it. If this study's right, it just means that every day we waste, people are going to die. Now, I think the next thing that's got to happen is that there has to be somebody out there who makes a request to the FDA, because this is how the process works, for an emergency use authorization again for hydroxychloroquine. And it has to be quite specific, Steve. It's got to be, we want to be able to use hydroxychloroquine in early treatment in a hospital setting, and also with outpatient use, doctor to patient in outpatient use, and for possible prophylaxis. That's what the FDA needs to be considering in the wake of these two studies. Because I can tell you that unless the FDA acts, it's not going to be possible for this hydroxychloroquine to be used. It just simply won't. I won't be able to work with FEMA to send this out to anywhere where it could get to hospitals for any use. And that's what's got to change. But in order for that to happen, the mainstream media has got to rise above itself and look at these studies and quit politicizing this. I mean, people are dying because of the fake news. And on this, they have been they're totally willing to publish the Brazil study. I mean, go to Mr. Google and Google that. It's like, oh, people die. Well, yeah, they gave him 3 times the dose. They gave him a lethal dose. Anyway, lest I digress, your show's going to have a lot to do with moving this.